$15 an hour minimum wage. Would you have signed up for it if you thought it was going to cost 5,000 jobs? Because new research from the Federal Reserve Bank of Minnesota says that is what it cost in the city of Minneapolis. 5,425 jobs between 2018 and 2023. 3,800 jobs in St. Paul, all because of the $15 minimum wage. The rest of the state right now is about $11.40. Was it worth it? To get some insight on the research, we bring in Anusha Nath, who is a senior research economist at the Minneapolis Fed. She's with us on the John Schuster Coldwell Banker Hotline. Anusha, it is that trade-off. That's what the question is. Thanks for being here.
Yes, thanks for having me on, Jason. I just wanted to highlight that throughout the conversation, whatever I say are my own views and not necessarily that of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis or the Federal Reserve System.
Very good.
So going back to your question about trade-offs. The economists have been kind of, looking at this issue of minimum wage. Some have found that minimum wage has very little effect or no effect on employment, and some have found that it has some negative effect on employment, that jobs go down as minimum wage increases. So we wanted to revisit this question, and we had no idea what we'll find, but we in fact found that when Minneapolis and St. Paul introduced their minimum wage policy back in 2017 and 2018, over time, we've been looking at what the effects are since then. And by the end of 2023, we find that jobs went down, wages did go up. But overall, we also find hours worked go down, and total earnings, the actual amount that workers take home, also went down. Yeah. So this kind of highlights the trade-off that you mentioned.
It's difficult, right? Because on an individual basis, it does make sense. We want to increase wages, especially for people at the low end. But if you increase the wage and don't have a job, what did you really get? I mean, that's sort of what economists are looking at, right?
Right. What we find actually is that some sectors were affected more than other sectors, which highlights this sort of idea that, bigger the exposure to the policy change, bigger are the effects. Now, what does it mean, exposure to the policy change? It means that businesses, when they're hiring workers, they have to figure out how much of the labor cost, so how much do they have to pay each worker more to meet the new policy change. The bigger the jump, the bigger is the exposure for those firms. And we find that firms and industries like the restaurant industries were more exposed to the policy. They found bigger effects.
Yeah, no huge surprise, but the numbers are a little eye-popping to me. Between 2018 and 2023, Minneapolis losing about 5,400 jobs in full-service restaurants. St. Paul losing almost 3,800 jobs. Do you think, or does the research show, obviously this was a tumultuous time. We had COVID in the middle of this. We had the George Floyd protests and then riots in some cases. Do you control for that in the research? Are you able to pull that out at all?
Yes, we do.
So to you, those things really were not major factors in the loss of jobs at all, that the minimum wage was the factor?
Right. By these numbers, we can show that these numbers are really isolating the effect of the minimum wage. And one more thing I wanted to add, we can do this period by period and say, okay, let's look at 1 year change, 2 year change, 3 year change, and see just look at 3 year changes over time and see, did it jump up in pandemic? And this methodology actually shows up. There was no jump up or, extra losses of jobs in Minneapolis or in St. Paul, which gives us some comfort that the fact that, it's about 15 to 20% every year, which 3 year changes we look at, it tells us that it's really the minimum wage policy and not these other factors.
Anusha Nath is with us, a researcher who took a look at the impact of higher pay, $15 minimum wage, but without question, fewer jobs. And it is a difficult, from a policy standpoint, Anusha, the policy ramifications of your research is really just having your eyes wide open, right? You could reasonably decide that it's worth it. It's worth losing a certain number of jobs, because why have a job if you're making a $9 wage that it's exploitive? But you need to be honest with yourself about what what the real world trade-offs are, right?
That's exactly right. I think you nailed it. I think the trade-off is important to understand. And once the policymakers know what the trade-offs are, they can then take a decision about how they want to respond to that. You know, who is it benefiting? Who is it hurting? And can we do something to allay the effects on those who it's hurting? And then they can take that decision. So this is basically just to highlight the trade-offs and also highlight that not every sector, not every firm is affected equally, but where the effects really are is useful to understand to make that decision.
Yeah, it does seem from your numbers when you break it down by various sectors, retail, hurt, restaurants, full service, and kind of counter service, similar impact on both of those, which surprised me a little bit. But those are the areas that seem to be hurt the most.
That's correct. And in sectors like the healthcare, where there are large, in 2017, at least 30% of the workers were earning below $15, saw less of an effect than did restaurants and the retail sector, as you mentioned. So it really depends on going back to the question of how exposed were these establishments before the minimum wage policy.
Super interesting stuff. It's good to have the data, and we're going to invite our listeners to weigh in on whether or not they think the trade-off is worth it. I'm mixed by it, but I think you have to look at that's a lot of jobs lost, and is that worth it? I don't know. It's tough. You guys didn't know either. That's why you dug into the numbers, and we appreciate that. Anusha Nath with the Fed in Minneapolis. So interesting. So interesting. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to be here. And that's our job, to highlight the trade-offs and then for the policymakers to figure out how best to respond.
I mean, sometimes it's better to be a researcher than a policymaker, right?
I would agree.
You don't have to make the tough call. Anusha Nath, thanks so much.
Thank you, Jason.
I mean, I don't want to have to make these decisions, but you get to weigh in at 651-461-9226. I think for me, the data indicates that we have a problem specifically in the restaurant business. And while many businesses can support these higher minimum wages, and we've seen the number of jobs in administration and support have gone up, the number of jobs in arts, entertainment, and recreation have gone up, but healthcare has been hurt. And full service restaurants have just been massacred, but also limited service restaurants. Now, is some of this just natural suburban flight? They say they've controlled for the impacts of some of this other stuff. I just think if you're able, and I ran the numbers on this not long ago, where I took a look at what the impact here is on restaurants. And it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on like how busy your restaurant is. But take in Minneapolis, if you had 10 servers doing 12 shifts every day a year, so if you were like a Keys Cafe, your labor cost for your servers is more than $700,000 a year. That same restaurant in Maple Grove is $500,000. And that same restaurant in Hudson, Wisconsin is $100,000. Because lots of states have a tipped wage for minimum wage. So I just think we're messing it up with restaurants. Let's go to Chris and Crystal. Chris, thanks for listening. Do you think it was worth it, the $15, when you hear that we've lost 5,000 Minneapolis jobs, 3,000 jobs in St. Paul? Was it worth it?
No, absolutely not. I think the numbers bear it out, and it's worth it. It's two areas. One, it's a bad tax on the restaurant owners, and it obviously put a lot of them out of business. But think about the 16-year-old in a free market that says, I'm willing to work my butt off for $10 an hour because I can't get a job anywhere else. You're taking that ability away from him or her also. When the government tries to go in and micromanage the economy, this is what happens.
Yeah. I think that's right, Chris. And sometimes you do have to put a floor in, right? Like when the minimum wage was $8 or $9 an hour, that that nobody should be paid $8 or $9 an hour. But I think activists have turned minimum wage into livable wage. And to me, that's not it. You should be able to move up a ladder. What the minimum wage being $15 has sort of made it where like everybody, your dishwasher is maybe making 18, your server is making 15, your cook is making 20. That's expensive. That's hard to run a business like that. And even quick serve restaurants are struggling. Doesn't make sense to me.
Oh, absolutely. And then people can't go out to eat. It just costs too much.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Let's go to Jeff in Sauk Rapids. Jeff, do you think it's worth it?
I think everybody's looking at this whole minimum wage thing all wrong. It's the economy, and it has sucked for a very long time, and I'll tell you why I say that. In 1970, I was working as a school bus driver for $12 an hour. In 1975, I went to work at the St. Cloud Police Department. My first W-2 was for $14,700, but I was able to buy a brand new 1977 pickup truck. My wife drove a 76 full-size car, and we had a 3-year-old house.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just not, they're just not looking at the scale of economy. I don't know. I'm not an economist.
Right. No, I know. Either am I. That's why we had the lady from the Fed on, Jeff. Thank you. Texters are saying, look, these jobs aren't supposed to be career jobs where they're making so much money to make it a career. Why do we have to inflate the minimum wage so much they can make it a career? I would caution like $15 an hour is not a career. If that's a full-time job, you're making $30,000 a year or so. That's minimum. That's minimum. I'm just saying, like, there was a denial that there would be any sort of real effect to this. And here's the Fed saying we ran the numbers, we controlled for the other stuff. There is an effect. And it's disproportionately hitting restaurants, and it also is hitting health care careers, but not to the same level. Tip credit is something that I think people don't understand, but I do think it would go a long way for our legislature to say, like, look, we value these little small town restaurants, and people are going to make the minimum wage, but they're making it in tips. And if they don't reach that level in tips, fine, then the owner has to pay them that. But you could do a tip minimum wage at $10 an hour, which is still way higher than Wisconsin, and it would make a significant difference. You go $8 an hour. I mean, there's a lot of choices.